Hello. So today is going to be my second part in my discussion of Lady Sabre and the Pirates of the Ineffable Aether, or Ether. I'm not really sure how they intend it to be pronounced. It's not like it's an audiobook, but Ether or Ether. It's still a really awesome webcomic, and I've got the physical book for it as well, along with a few extra sort of side pieces. Now, in the last episode, I sort of discussed who made it and what the basic premise of the comic is. This one, I'm going to be concentrating mainly on how to make a game out of it. Now, anybody can make a game out of anything. Making a game world or a role-playing game based on your favorite setting is kind of a thing we do as gamers. I can remember playing, games when I was a little kid of trying to, make my comic book heroes into, a role-playing game. And then I got Marvel superheroes, and that was kind of cool, and I learned how to use that, and it's kind of a goofy game, but it's fun, and I tried a bunch of other games, and really it's about turning these worlds into games, right? And some people will do the work for you. Like, there have been several Marvel superheroes role-playing games. There have been a few DC heroes role-playing games. And people went in and did the work of turning that into game terms so that you can play in those worlds. Amber, another good one, where they did the conversion for you. Star Wars. There have been 3 Star Wars games at this point, not including the various versions of the D20 version, but just counting it as one. There have been 3. And it's good stuff. I mean, it's a lot of fun to play in those worlds. But sometimes you want to make a game of a world that hasn't been turned into a game yet. And there are a lot of approaches to take with that. And I'm going to be using Fate Core as my basis here. Now, Fate is interesting because it's built on a model of sort of simulating the narration, simulating the story, rather than trying to simulate individual combat turns. Early role-playing games were essentially war games with some extra bits added on. This one is more of a game about trying to everybody sort of collaboratively tell a really interesting story. So the mechanics of it are such that they are designed to encourage stories, and you don't necessarily have to know the, flight speed of a skyship or, some sort of steampunk style flyer. You don't have to know how many rounds are in a particular gun versus a different kind of gun, because you have, story elements. You can say, well, you have the aspect of short on ammo for some reason, or you can use the aspects of describing the ship, saying that okay, I can go faster than that guy, and then you do a check and so on. But it's more about describing what's going on than it is systematally what's going on. And that's a distinction that's kind of hard for people to wrap their minds around at times, especially if all they played is D&D. But it makes for a very involved player base because they are part of the back and forth of telling that story. Without going too far into Fate, one of the bits to it is that you can spend a fate point to change some minor aspect of the scene. The classic example is you walk up on a guarded door, and you spend a fate point to say that your mercenary character has worked with that guy who's on guard tonight, and maybe they've palled around a few times. You spend the fate point. The game master goes, "Yeah, that seems reasonable." He accepts the fate point, and that's suddenly a truth of the world. It's very much a back and forth kind of thing. With that in place, that understanding in place, one of the things with Fate Core is that it's sort of a communal game creation. So let's look at the game creation of Pirates of the Ineffable Aether and that world. So, Fate Core, which you can get at any, a reputable game store or through their website, definitely worth getting. And I believe that they have a sort of online OGL type of thing. One of the first things that you need to do is determine the setting. Now, it would be simple to say, well, we're setting it in the world of Lady Sabre, but the problem there is Lady Sabre's world is pretty vast. Let me give you a brief overview of the group, the nations that you're looking at there. You're looking at, let's see, Illyria. I hope I'm saying that right. Illyria, which is the nation that Lady Sabre is from, which is ruled by a queen who's sort of an eternal figure called the Rose. You've got Fuel, which is the largest nation, but they don't give a lot of details about it. And Fuel is sort of French, is the best description I can give, but not precisely. Like Illyria is very English. It's very much built on the Victorian England kind of model, at least what you see of it in the story. But Fuel is sort of French, but it still has a king, and it's less clear how close to France it actually is. There's Tanatin, or I hope I'm saying that right, Tanatin, which is a sort of contested colonial frontier that for the past couple of hundred years, 3 major nations have been vying for it. Holleran, which is sort of a conglomeration of nations that unified, became a nation in and of itself. And there are a few others, a place called Vaughn, but the world is very vast, and they've only shown parts of it in the comic. And when you're trying to set up a game, you want to have parameters. And part of what you're going to be doing is deciding the scale. Because you could absolutely run a game in a small town in the easterly section of Tennessee and be cowboys and Indians. Essentially. That's not exactly right, but that's close enough for government work. You could totally tell just an Old West story, an Old West style story, with maybe some mystical underpinnings in this setting. And that's pretty significant. It's interesting, and it's certainly one of the strengths of the setting. A good setting allows you to tell a lot of different stories within it, right? Both a game setting and I guess as a story setting. You want to be able to have a bunch of different kinds of games in your game. You can play in Star Wars. You could play a bunch of Jedi running around doing Jedi stuff, or you could play a gritty we're all smugglers kind of game, and they both fit in the same world. This is the same thing in Lady Sabre. The world is vast and detailed enough that you could have a game where you're playing smugglers, or you could be the town sheriff and his posse, or you could deal with the machinations of nations, and that's where they call on scale. What scale do you want your game to be? Now, the comic pretty much is a high scale thing, but it starts out small. I would say that a high scale or a large scale game in this particular case would be appropriate if you're trying to capture the feel of the comic. They're sort of traveling around the sphere, finding adventure, looking for things that multiple forces are looking for, and could affect the course of nations. So that's important. That's definitely worth paying attention to, and that would make it a larger scale thing. It's not just I got a gun and I'm getting into fights. You can play that game in this setting. And I'm definitely going to say that, if you want to play that game in this setting, you totally could. But if you want to capture the feel of the comic, you may want to go a little higher stakes. That's where I'm at on that. There's tensions between nations. You could be helping to avert a war. You could be, doing all sorts of things along those lines. And that's an appropriate level of scale for this game. And they actually talk about that in the game creation rules in here, is you need to determine setting and scale. So I would go with it's a large scale, and therefore the setting is primarily, well, in the case of the comic, it would be primarily on that ship, the Pegasus. Pirate crews and merchantmen and privateers are all very common things in this setting. So, you have a ship, that's your primary setting, and your primary setting travels from point to point to point. So, you're on that ship until you get to, some small town in Tennyton, or some small town in, a major city in Illyria. And you are doing different things that lead from point A to point B for various causes. And this leads to the next stage, which is talking about issues. Now, most games usually are going to have about 2 issues, one current and one potential or pending issue. Now, in the comic, the current issue is the Smoke. The Smoke is a vast criminal or enterprise, and they are out to do no good. Now, they are constantly trying to cut off Lady Sabre from the things that she's acquiring. They want to get the map and the key, and they'll send their agents to do deadly work to try and get those things. That's a current issue. A pending issue a potential issue, is this oncoming great storm. Now, these are things that a game master or a referee would sort of invoke for story effect. They would invoke it to say, all right, this is an agent of this person, and or you run into a bad guy. Oh wait, randomly this is actually an agent of the smoke. Or a player could be saying, you know what, I don't believe that this guy who's been giving us such a hard time is just giving us a hard time. I believe he's an agent of the smoke, and he might get a fate point for that, and that kind of sort of back and forth with the aspects to sort of control the narrative flow. Whereas the smoke is the current issue, the oncoming storm. So they talk about in the setting, especially in the comic, that the storms, ether storms happen. They just happen every so often. But really great epic ones come along, and they rearrange land masses, and they they can scour clean entire countrysides. They're terrible, terrible events. So those sorts of things are tremendously dangerous, and having the ability to predict when one is coming is important. And that's the impending issue, is that there is one coming. And knowing when and where it's going to hit is the next big issue that you're going to have in this setting. Now, once you have the issues established, then you can start establishing what they call faces and places. These are the named figures that may have a direct tie to those issues. A good example in the comic would be Darius Payne. He is the face of the smoke. He is there to cause trouble. He is part of that issue. He is an agent of that issue. And so he would be a face to the issue that you're dealing with. Now, in your game, if you're going for a different sort of issue, say, for instance, the pending issue is finding Illyrian spies in the Fuel court. There are Rose spies in the Fuel court. And then the pending issue would be rumors of war between Fuel and Illyria. Those would be excellent sort of issues to have in a game. But if you were doing that, the faces for those issues would be things like Lady Margalotta, who is, of course, secretly an agent of the Rose, that you can never quite find enough proof to show that she is. Something like that. Once you start defining those faces, then you can define aspects to those faces. Whereas Darius Payne is, an aspect of his might be a well-funded man. Because he seems to have a nearly bottomless supply of money. You can hire minions and toughs, and apparently have steampunk mecha that try and kill people. I mean, he's kind of got all the money. So that might be an aspect to him. This sort of structure to creating your game is sort of core to creating the game in Fate Core. And normally I would be doing this with a group of people. We'd be sitting around a table and saying, okay, what do we want? Do we want the large-scale setting? Do we want to be the crew of a privateer ship? Do we want to be a Tinnitin Marshal and his deputies? And, we would go back and forth and decide what the scale was, what we were working on. But, these are just ideas, guidelines, if you will, for how you might put this into a game. Now, once you get past those initial stages of picking places, faces, the issues and the issues they go with, and the setting and the scale, then you would get into making the characters, and that would require more specific knowledge about how this works. But ultimately, it boils down to creating historical bits for your characters and how they link to each other, but also how they link to the game that you've just created. If you're creating somebody like a Lady Seneca, how is she connected to the smoke? Or the issue of the impending storm? Or the setting? How is she connected to the ship? Is she the captain of the ship? How did she become a captain? Those historical stories define aspects about the characters that you'll be playing. Now, I have gone through and added some loose setting material in my Google Docs, which I am putting a link to in the show notes. Feel free to click on it. This is very loose information. Here's the thing. When you're doing a setting based off of an existing IP, you have to sort of scour to get all the information that you can find. All I can use for my setting information is the stuff that's in here. Yay! And the stuff in here. And the stuff that's on the website. And Greg Rucka, being an excellent writer, has, created them in a much more story-driven way. And so the details of the world are not laid out in a, this is this nation, this is their capital, this is how many people live here, this is, the stuff that we might be used to in game books, being able to, this is the capital of so-and-so, and this is the ruler, and this is, the makeup of the people that live there, and this is their favorite food, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's not there. So I'm really just sort of scouring for information. There's more information than what I felt comfortable putting in there, mainly because I didn't want to impinge too much on copyright issues or anything like that. That said, I think that the setting could use a wiki, especially if you plan on using it for gaming. Start putting all the stuff you can learn into a wiki and keeping it organized. Mr. Rucker doesn't need that necessarily. He might, but he doesn't need it necessarily because he's not running a game in it. He doesn't need all his players to know where everything is. He needs to know where everything is. As long as he knows, that's fine. So, the long and the short of that is it becomes sort of tricky to put it together in a gaming format. But I've tried to give a loose outline so you have sort of a starting point. When you're making, if you decide to run in Fate, Pirates of the Ineffable Aether, or Ether, you have to sort of approach it from a standpoint of looking at what the themes and what they're doing, and trying to figure out how to reflect that. This is a setting of high adventure. You know, you're not going to play the local grocer who gets mugged. You know, in Fate, all one of the base assumptions of Fate is all the characters are exceptional. They are all deeply, deeply fascinating and interesting people who live exceptional lives. If you're not exceptional, you know, you're probably not a player character in Fate. Pirates of the Ineffable Aether is, a game for exceptional people. You're on flying ships, cutting through between land masses, floating, spinning through space inside of an enclosed sphere filled with dangerous material called ether, or aether, which occasionally produces storms that wipe out civilizations. This is pretty heady stuff. And the kind of people who are heroes in that story are not going to be the grocer. They're not going to be, the ditch digger. These are going to be extraordinary people. They're going to be, frontier marshals and trackers and pirate captains and, madmen and crazy things. Can you play an ordinary person in there? Yes, but they have to have something extraordinary about them. You can play a gravedigger, but make it an extraordinary gravedigger who ends up in extraordinary adventures. This is, what the setting is about. The setting is extraordinary. It's filled with, some of the most adventurous and interesting, archetypes you could think of. So play with that. And that's why I picked Fate. Fate actually is designed with that in mind. You are playing extraordinary individuals. That is the core concept. And you're describing how those extraordinary people do extraordinary things. So, while gritty is appealing, and there are certainly some gritty stories that you could possibly tell in this world, I would advise you to steer away from gritty. I would instead advise you to go towards the Errol Flynn side of the Force. I would advise you to go for, swinging from the chandeliers, stagecoach chases, high-flying adventure. Leave the gritty to something else. Gritty can be to somewhere else. My main advice is, if you're going to be playing in this world, go for broke. Just throw it to the wall. Be extraordinary people. And, you could be the steampunk inventor. You could be the slightly mystical gravedigger. You could be the Earthwalker who ended up on a ship as the first mate. You could be the Prince of the Pistoliers. Be extraordinary. That's the kind of characters that you want in this setting, and I think you'll have a happier time with the game if you do that. That said, I think I'm going to wrap this up. I hope that the brief guidelines I gave would help. Please let me know if they do. And I'm going to open up the document, if I can, to comments. So feel free to make comments, and I'll update and I'll edit as needed. Like I said before, go check out the comic. Lady Sabre and the Pirates of the Ineffable Aether is amazing. And I'll include a link to their website and a link to where you can get Fate Core if you want to use that. And I may do this again for another setting at some point, but this was just an experiment to see if I could sort of enumerate why I enumerate. That's not the right word. Describe how to turn this into a fun game. And now I want to go play it. Unfortunately, I don't have a social life. I'm going to go now. Y'all have fun.